It's Becky, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May. I originally wanted to read this book because I've previously read Elizabeth May's The Falconer series and I really enjoyed it. And I've not read any of Laura Lamb's work before, but I've heard good things. And I mainly was just seeing how they were both going to write some sci-fi, especially because I've never read sci-fi from Elizabeth May before. Seven Devils has loads of amazing sci-fi world building. One of the key things is that it kind of describes how the human race has achieved space travel and then colonized the entire universe, and this is all to try and get resources that they've been running out of on one planet. And it really parallels the issues we have anyway in the real world, where we don't have enough resources and we're using them too quickly, and it feels like a very natural progression for the human race. Then there's like AI, space travel, aliens, and even I think it's described as the next evolution of the human race. But we're given a lot of history. We're kind of given history of the colonization of planets, the different genocides that have happened, because once we've colonized, we've kind of killed off the inhabitants of that planet. There is also religion in this book. It's kind of an overarching religion, which I kind of understand why it's used, but at the same time I'm a bit dubious as to whether some of the people who created this religion actually believe it. It's based on different gods which you have to kind of pray to, sacrifice to in the name of the god, and all these gods are kind of negative. I think at one point one of our main characters actually says like there's no god of mercy or something like that, and this is whilst she was kind of under the thumb of the empire, and she is trying to convince herself that she should be killing for the good of the empire. The Thelosian Empire itself is actually completely programmed to run underneath an AI, where the only people that aren't really programmed are the kind of emperor, or there is a lower class which have been born and not programmed. However, they are basically just there to work and don't really show any threat to the empire itself. Speaking of kind of emperors and the lower class, our main cast of characters is plucked from lots of different areas of life. They all have different upbringings, but they all have to come together to save the world, or save the universe, should I say. And what I liked about this is that we actually do see past and present chapters. So most of our characters, we get not only the current storyline that we're seeing, but we also get some past chapters. This shows us their backstory, their upbringing, and it really explains their motivations. So you really get into the head of each of these characters through the backstory that has been built for them. I would also say the cast is quite diverse. There's multiple LGBT characters, there's a strong female-female relationship, and then there's also a trans woman in a leadership position. Seven Devils does end up having 7 main characters in its cast. However, only 5 of these have point of view chapters, so it does get a little bit confusing there at the beginning. Depending on what you're used to reading, some people may find this difficult to pick up because it does swap quite cleanly and quite often throughout the book between which character you're focused on. But I believe once you get into the story and you understand who is who, and you start to see the distinction between characters, which happens quite early on, you do find it a lot easier to read and understand who is who. First up, I want to talk about Eris, who is kind of our main character on the front cover. Eris has actually changed her name and changed her face in order to join the rebellion in this world. So for the first part of the book, you're genuinely just trying to figure out who she is, and you're kind of guessing. And then earlier in the book, we actually get told, which I thought was a really good use of our time, as we didn't spend the whole book trying to find out who she was. Eris's backstory is kind of entwined with Prince Damocles, who is our bad guy in this book, and also Xander, who is a character I wish we'd seen more of. She's a very strong-willed character, and she's trying to kind of make up for all the wrongs she has done while she was under the Empire rule, and she often does this by making more mistakes, which isn't due to lack of trying, it's just due to mistakes. I feel like the book does centre on her main plotline quite a lot, but I am really excited to see what happens to her in the follow-up book because it really was beautifully written, and her storyline is left on a little bit of a cliffhanger because we want to know exactly what she's going to plan to do next. The next main character we meet is Chloe, and Chloe highly contrasts Eris because they are actually quite antagonistic towards each other despite being on the same team. There's also quite a few differences between their upbringing, which also causes them to have this tension. And the first thing is that Chloe is actually naturally born, and she lived in the kind of slums in this city in one of the main planets of the Empire. This means that she wasn't programmed by the AI, she has all her own thoughts, and she didn't need to be deprogrammed in order to join the rebellion. And then Eris actually lived in the city above the slums, which is a place for all of the higher class, and she was also not programmed. So there's definitely similarities there, but the key difference is that they were a completely different class and they had completely different upbringing, and that is brought up in the book as well. One of the backstory chapters actually tells us exactly why Chloe and Eris have a conflict between them at the beginning of the book, and we need to keep reading to see how they're going to actually try to work together to complete their mission for the rebellion, as they are technically on the same side despite that conflict, and they end up actually having to learn to work together quite well. There's a lot of anger due to lack of trust, and I believe that's because when they met they actually ended up getting on, and then this thing happened, which I'm not going to spoil you for, which kind of tore them apart. And you could see, whilst there's a lot of anger between them, they do care about each other. This just made the dynamic between them really interesting to read, because you always wanted to know what was going to happen and what was going to maybe be the final straw for the other one to walk away. Next up, we have Child Genius, and brought up by the One, who is the AI, and that is Ariadne. Her job assigned at birth was to basically help program the One, or the AI, which is what controls the rest of the Empire. And because this is kind of a full-time job, she was kind of excluded from all human interaction, and she missed out of really having a human life despite her not being programmed and not really having anything to do apart from guide the One to be a better AI at controlling humans. She's definitely the brains of the operation, and she's the reason why our next two characters, Rhea and Nyx, were deprogrammed and joined the rebellion. She's also still a child, and she's definitely the one that initiates the found family feeling of the book. The crew on the ship ends up becoming very tight-knit, and whilst there's still conflicts such as between Chloe and Eris, they are kind of a conflicting family rather than direct adversaries. And whilst her upbringing meant that she's very awkward around people because she doesn't know how to interact with humans, her heart really is in the right place, and she's always trying to help others. Next character is Rhea. She was a dancer in kind of these houses that the Empire has, and she was particularly a dancer for Prince Damocles. She's the least trained for combat, and actually the skills she has at the beginning makes her seem like she's the least useful member of the crew. However, she has the most empathy towards people, and she really helps us trust some of the other characters that turn up. I'm not going to say too much about Rhea because her story arc was one that really surprised me, and I was really interested about it, and I don't want to spoil it for you if you're going to read this book as well. It was so well done in the fact that there was hints to what was happening, and if I reread this I would definitely pick up on them. However, as soon as it was said, I was in shock. And then last but not least for our point of view characters is Nyx. Nyx was trained and heavily programmed to be a soldier by the Empire. Because of this, she holds so much guilt for all the atrocities that she has done in the name of the Empire while she was programmed. Because deprogramming unfortunately does not remove the memories of what you have done when programmed. It's not like brainwashing in the same way that you might read in other books. You remember everything you did whilst programmed. Nyx and Eris were actually brought up in very similar ways, except one of them is programmed and one of them wasn't. And I really enjoyed the kind of camaraderie that they made between each other because of the similarities. And this helped them kind of chip away at the walls at each other, which helped them open up not only between each other, but also with the rest of the crew. Then for our non-point of view characters, we also meet Kyra, who is a badass leader of the rebels and is the trans woman I mentioned earlier. There's not much of her backstory because she's not a point of view character, but we do pick up different things, and the key part is that in this universe, There's very little people that are naturally born. However, most people are currently being born / created in vats and then immediately programmed and trained to be in a certain career from birth. There's really no choice. You can't grow up and choose to be something else because you are programmed to want to do the job you've been assigned. For example, Nyx is part of a group who were all made in vats, and that entire vat was I don't know the word for it, but that they were a particular section of the army, as they were all soldiers, and there's very little difference between them. So Kyra's vat section was also with her brother, who we also meet, and it was an all-male section, and they had no choice on changing who they were or not becoming soldiers. And obviously her being deprogrammed and then transitioning and choosing what she wants to do with her life has made her life 10 times better, despite the hardships of being a rebel leader. This whole kind of that process and programming and Kyra really points out the fact that there's really no sense of self in this universe unless you are deprogrammed, because programming humans kind of takes away that element of personality. Then we have our hostage pilot Kato, who is, well, taken hostage, but he has lots of his own struggles, and I really enjoyed seeing this, as it's similar to Nyx in one way, but it also creates a lot of empathy for him and for other characters that we don't meet in this book, because they're all suffering in similar ways. And one of the key themes throughout the book is that the Phalosian Empire basically forces you to be complicit in the dehumanization of others. When kind of Nyx and Kato were programmed to kill and harm other human beings, they maybe didn't want to, and actually, like, when you see them later in the book, they feel so guilty about it, but because they've been programmed and they're complicit into this murder and this horrible atrocities that they've done. Not our main characters, but other people definitely benefit off this. So there's a higher class which benefit on this. At the same time, there's characters like Kyra, who are also a soldier, but because they've been programmed, they have been made less than a human because they can't be themselves. And I think it's a really strong theme throughout the book that whilst a lot of these programmed guards are human, they're not acting as human. And I really liked one part of the book where they try to save someone purely on the basis that they can make the decision once they're deprogrammed, and they can make an actual decision and it's not being controlled by the AI, because it shows that whilst that these programmed people are less than human in some cases, but shouldn't be treated that way just because they've been forced to do things against their will. And this lack of control also shows that humans aren't kind of adapting to survive or anything like that. The AI is programming them to do certain things, and then they can, I guess, build other things to do the extra things they don't need to do, similar to how humans do anyway. But this means that there's really no personalities, there's no humanity, and actually I think it affected the evolution of humans because it stopped them. This is years into the future, I believe, and the humans all look the same apart from the fact that they're programmed. And there is an evolutionary line that has adapted to different parts of the universe, but they've kind of stunted their evolution due to the lack of control and lack of ability to choose to do things differently. On top of the AI being programmed, there's also the religion that I mentioned earlier, and the religion is used to reduce the consequences of actions. For example, the needless murder I mentioned before is often justified as a sacrifice to the god of death. And then the name Seven Devils actually parallels the seven gods in this world, where the gods are like gods of death, and they all parallel different, I guess, more sins rather than good things such as happiness or love. And then the number 7 is then paralleled with our 7 main characters, who whilst there are good guys, have all done bad things, have sinned in different ways. However, they are making up for that in their actions now. By the end of the book, I was completely in love. I really enjoyed reading it. I loved the storyline, the world building, the characters. There's really not a lot bad to say about it. However, my main hesitancy in reading the book at the beginning was that it was an extremely slow start. There is a lot of information packed into the first book, and I think this is the same with most sci-fi books. So it is a genre thing and not a book thing. However, if you're not used to reading sci-fi, it may be too much and it may take you out of the book. So whilst I did get through it and I did end up loving it, if you are feeling the same way at the beginning of the book, I would recommend just pushing through to get to the more action-packed parts if that's what you enjoy more. However, I would understand why people might put this book down. So overall, I'm just really excited to see what the second book in the series brings, because it does unfortunately end on a cliffhanger and you want to know more. But thank you so much for watching this review. I really hope to see you again soon.